Check, 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 check. Hi. It's working. Muted, unmuted, no. There it is. All right. Evening, everybody. Get everybody going here. I know we've got everybody dropping off for water night tonight. It's not too late. If you brought your bathing suit, you can still go run around out there with the kids, or you can stay in here with me. Those are your options tonight. So we're going to be starting the book of 2 John tonight. It is a short and sweet letter of a whole 13 verses. So while Josh is enjoying some much needed time away with the kids and with Mandy, Thank you again for joining us tonight. If you didn't get a copy of the scripture tonight and you'd like a copy, can you raise your hand for me? I think Stacy got everybody covered. Thank you, Stacy. All right, cool. So again, short and sweet. So we'll go ahead and get started. And before we read it, let's open in prayer and we'll jump into this letter. Father, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for just the joy of the kids tonight as they are enjoying some water time to close out their summer vacation. We thank you for our volunteers and our leaders in our children's ministry who are back there braving that storm and having a good time with our kids. Thank you for the service that they are providing for our children. Thank you for the opportunity to teach through this letter tonight. It is as we've said, a short letter, but Father, very profound in helping us to understand truth and love and how those things are to work together in our Christian walk. Help us to see that tonight as we begin our study. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. So, what do we know about 2 John? Who is the author, if you had to guess? Timothy, that's right. I heard Timothy, I heard Titus. Who'd we hear? We're good. Yeah, so who's our author? What does it tell us in verse 1? So who's it from? The elder, all right. So who is the elder? Because it never actually says from John. See, it's from the elder. Who is the elder? How do we know it's John? What gives us clues that it's John, aside from the name of the gospel and the name of the letter? Any ideas? Cool. All right. So traditionally and historically, this has been attributed to John, John, son of Zebedee, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus. It has been attributed to John because of a couple different things. One is because it's very, very similar in style, in word choice, and in content as the letter of 1 John and John's gospel. So because the language and everything is so clear and the attribution, there's really nothing to contest it in church history. We attribute these three small letters, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, to the apostle and disciple John. He refers to himself as the elder here. We're going to talk about that a little bit more as we dig in as to what that title, because really he's using it as a title here when he writes this letter. Who is John writing to? Any thoughts? He's writing to the elect lady and her children. So who is the elect lady? That'll be another one of our big questions tonight. We don't see this written necessarily to a specific church, right? A lot of our New Testament letters will begin to the church at Galatia, to the church at Ephesus, to the church at Corinth. Here we don't have that. We don't have a specific church, at least mentioned, that he's writing to, but rather we have the elect lady. So we'll have to see who that is, and her children are the target of this. In terms of dating, this is likely written 85 to 95 AD, so about 30 years after 2 Timothy and Paul's martyrdom, which we recently studied on Wednesday nights, and not too long after, about the same actually, after Philemon. Roughly the same assumed date as John's Revelation also, which was written around, I think the agreement is around 95 AD. So almost, 60 years after Christ has been killed and resurrected, we see the letter being written here from 2 John. If you can imagine John being a relatively young man when Jesus was doing his ministry around 30 to 33 AD, John is 60 years older than that. So John's at least in his late 70s, probably getting into his 80s at this point. So he's been around for quite some time, which probably giving us some elder language, right, for this. In terms of structure, this is a pretty standard letter. It's got a greeting and welcome, it's got a body of content, and it's got a closing conclusion. Nothing outstanding there. The audience is the chosen lady and her children. This is a different audience than John's first letter. So 1 John, compared to 2nd and 3rd, much shorter, much longer book than 2nd and 3rd John. So 1 John, a lot more content. It's meant to be a circular letter that would be passed around to different churches, whereas this one is very specific. So this one's being written to someone, right, or to a group of people, the elect lady and her children. It is written as a way to combat something that's going on in the church at the time, which is you've got a group of Christians who have basically decided for themselves that Christ really wasn't fully man and fully God. He was fully man, but maybe wasn't fully God, or he wasn't the Son of God. So they didn't believe in the full incarnation. And they're continuing to try to teach this as Christians. They want to be seen as Christians as they're teaching this. And so it's causing division in the church. It's causing a lot of confusion in the church. And so John is writing this letter specifically to combat that party and that movement. And to try and reinforce, again, the incarnation of Christ being fully man and fully God. For those of you who have read 2 John in the past, what are some verses maybe that stand out in the short letter that you can think of? Sort of like memory verses or verses that come to mind. Any? So one that comes to mind for me and for a lot of people is verse 6, which says, "And this is love, that we walk in obedience to his command. As you have heard from the beginning, his command is that you walk in love." Very popular when it talks about the Christian life. And then verse 9 is also, I think, popular for some. So why don't we go ahead and jump in and we will read it. Let's read it. I think we can read it twice pretty easily. And then what we'll do is we'll open it up to kind of do our inductive study, our inductive process. We'll ask questions. We'll start to see what stands out as we begin the study. Sound good? All right, lots of nods. Good. So we'll begin in verse 1. "So the elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth. Because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever, grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. I rejoiced greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but the one that we've had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves, so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting. For whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. Though I have much to write you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister greet you." All right, let's read 1 through 6 again. That's where we're going to be hanging out tonight. So again, the elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth that abides in us and will be with us forever, grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, in truth and love. I rejoiced greatly to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as we were commanded by the Father. And now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but the one we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. Okay, having read it, what questions stand out to you? What comes to mind as we read through that passage?
What is John saying? Like, what does he mean when he says the truth?
Okay. Yeah, what is the truth? Okay.
He says it like
A bunch.
7 times.
7 times, yeah. Yeah. What else?
First to love, and I know First John, that's the whole entire book. If they received First John, I thought they needed more, encouragement in that area.
Mhm.
It's totally different. They never
Good question. So the timing of 1 John, which is very much about love, so is he having to reinforce that, or have they not read that letter and you're repeating it? Very good. Other questions? Good one. Yeah, so some of your children in verse 4. Good question. Yes, Miss Debbie.
I see truth in 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Going back to the old adage, God repeats himself 3 times. You better sit up and listen.
That's right. Yeah, and if so, I know there's at least 4. I think there might be even 7. Yeah, so I think we might even have 7. So, and again, if you see something 7 times, it's even more important, right? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Other questions? So one we brought up earlier, who is the elect lady? Like, who is this letter to? Right? And why is this lady so important? All right. What else? That's good. Okay, so he uses the term elder. Does that mean that he is specifically like an overseer or a pastor of this church? Very good. Okay. All right, so what about these? What about the commandments? So he mentions the commandments a couple times and then defines them, but what specifically is he talking about? The 10 commandments? Is he talking about something else? What are those commandments?
Going back to the commandment, into 5 and 6, he says from the beginning. He says that twice. So, like, what is the beginning?
Yeah, so what is the beginning? Good question.
I always equate that command with love.
The command with love? So 10 commandments, is it the love commandments that we have from Jesus, right? When he says, this is the commandment that you love my Father and that you love one another. Yep. All right. Anything else? So I had one more. So at the end of verse 6, it says, just as you've heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. What is the it there? If you have I think it's the NIV, it says love, I think, maybe in the NIV. Do you have other translations? Love, okay. Love, okay. So that's interesting. It's translated a couple different ways, but love is the primary in a lot of translations. Very good. Anything else? These are really good questions. I think we're going to cover most of them tonight after I get a drink of water.
What's the question that he asked the lady?
Oh, that's great. So when he says that I ask, and I ask you, dear lady.
He doesn't really ask.
Yeah, what's the ask? Okay, cool. All right, so who wants to try and maybe outline this letter so far? If you had to kind of put this into a rough bullet outline, what would that look like? 13 verses. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yep, so greeting 1 through 3. Yep. It's an opening. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
It's laying out what he is writing about because I found another truth.
Mm-hmm.
And he says truth, uses truth 5 times. Just in the reading.
That's right.
4 times, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Just in the reading. And normally, at least according to the pattern that Paul's epistles ran with, that first paragraph of verses 1 and 2 would not necessarily be there. Paul usually started grace, mercy, and peace.
Yeah, so the structure is a little different. And so that's something, I do want to point out, because the structure of the greeting is actually really different than a lot of New Testament letters. It may not feel different, but it is. Good. All right, so that's our first section. Anybody want to take a swing at what our next section would be? Yeah, so 4 to 6, this encouragement about I have joy that you've been walking in love, and this definition of love and truth together. Yeah, so absolutely, 4 to 6 is kind of that next section. 7 to 11, anybody want to kind of summarize that section? Yeah, so a warning against false teachers and how to handle those when you encounter them. And then finally, 12 and 13 are conclusion. So real simple, kind of 4 bullet point outline. That's exactly what I got, so spot on. So the general purpose of this book is really it's an urgent plea for the readers of this letter to show their love for God and his son Jesus by obeying the commandment to love one another and to live their lives in obedience to the scriptures, the truth. 2 John's also a strong warning to be on the lookout for deceivers and false teachers who are going about denying the incarnation, saying that Christ had actually not come in the flesh. So that's where we end up landing as we go into this. So let's start with section 1. So greetings, verses 1 through 3. The book of 2 John is addressed to the chosen lady and her children. So the chosen lady could have either been maybe a lady of important standing in a church. It could also be like a code word. So it was not unusual for Christians who were being persecuted to use some of these kind of code words in their correspondence. The word in Greek, actually, the word for church and the word for lady are pretty similar and kind of look the same. So there's sort of 5 different interpretations that have sort of settled in for this phrase. The first 2 being literally the Lady Electra or the... Oh, thank you, Siri. That's not what I wanted. So Siri didn't find it either. So the Lady Electra or the noble Kyria, which is that word in Greek is Kyria. I don't know how it's pronounced, but it looks like that. So it could be specifically a lady. It could be a title or an actual name. Not likely compared to what we'll see. The third interpretation is more of like just a term or a salutation, meaning dear lady. It's actually repeated in verse 5 there when John says, I ask you, dear lady. So it's this kind of term of respect and endearment. The fourth is that it can be used often as a term for the church at large. So we think like capital C church, like the global church. And we have some examples of that. In 1 Peter 5:13, Peter uses this language describing the church as a woman or as a bride. 2 Corinthians 11, Paul spends a good bit of time talking about personifying the church as the bride and as a woman. In this imagery. And then Revelation, John himself uses in 19, 12, and 21, this image of the church as the bride of Christ and like the woman who is being persecuted. So it's not uncommon to see New Testament writers, that's Peter, Paul, and John, and the 3 examples, use the image of a woman or the metaphor of a woman to represent the church and the kind of the global church. And then also, the most likely interpretation of this is to look at it as part of the bigger expression. So to see the lady chosen by God and her children is a common metaphor for addressing a local church and its members. So specifically, the elect, so that language starts to look at people chosen by God. The elect is often targeted to a group of people rather than sort of the full crew. And then seeing, and her children. So that's looking at really the language here that best fits us is this idea of the elect lady being a local church and the children being her members. All right. How do we know that that's the case? What clues do we have in this letter that we've seen so far that that's likely the case? That we're talking about a church and its members versus a specific lady and her actual children. Any clues that you guys see in there? Yeah, so some of your children are walking in truth and love. Yep. Miss Debbie. Yeah, so speaking to a wider audience there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so not just to the lady and her children, but also all who know the truth. That's right. Yep.
That just doesn't bring to a family thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the even verses as we go down are really good hints for this as well. So the word you in verse 6, so where he says, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. The word in verse 8, watch yourselves so that you may not lose what we've worked for. Verse 10, where he says, everyone comes to you. And then verse 12, though I have much to write to you. All of those yous in the Greek are plural. So it's like our y'all, right? I had a joke with somebody earlier today who said, I'm working on my Southern version of the Bible where all of the yous are replaced by y'alls whenever they need to be plural. I think it just makes everything easier, as Southerners often do. But these are all plural yous. And so for it to be speaking to a specific woman, And using this plural you over and over again it doesn't jive. It actually makes a little more sense for it to be specifically the elect lady and her children. And then at the end in verse 13, where we see the children of your elect sister greet you. That's, again, another metaphor kind of sense of another church. So the members of this other church greet you, because often at the end of a letter, we see greetings from whoever the writer is with. Mr. Brady. Mm-hmm. Could it possibly be who? So there's no evidence to show that would be Mary and her children. There's just not really anything in the literature that shows us that that's what we're referencing there. Yeah, it's overwhelmingly using the language of Peter and Paul and John and the other writers. That language is used frequently to talk about specifically the church and the church members. A good example of that also, so where else have we seen, so we talked about the lady as the church. Where else do we have the use of little children to mean church members? Where else do we see that in the New Testament? I'm sorry? Paul uses it, yes. So Paul uses it frequently. So Galatians 4:19, where he says, my little children, who's bewitched you? He's referring to the Galatian church. And 1 John, he uses it 7 times. He says little children 7 times in the letter to 1 John. And he's specifically, in those cases, talking about the church. So for this to be the same writer in the next letter, it makes total sense that little children is continuing, and children is continuing to reference the members of the church. All right? So let's go on to verse 3 then. So grace, mercy, and peace will be with us from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, and truth and love. All right, so lots of stuff here. It can be really easy for us often to kind of glaze over the introduction to a letter because they all kind of feel the same. We want to get to the meat. We want to know, like, what's the practical application? What are the lessons that we're trying to learn? Let's get past the hellos. But John is packing a lot of stuff into verse 3. And he's doing it in a way, as Ms. Debbie mentioned, the structure is really different from a lot of other New Testament letters when it opens up. A couple things that jump out is that the grace, mercy, and peace, usually that is Paul or the writer is wishing grace, mercy, and peace, or I wish grace, mercy, and peace to you. May it come to you. Whereas John's much more direct with this. He says grace, mercy, and peace will be with us, right? So it's something that's already happening. It's with us now. It will continue to be with us. And then it's very rare for the writer to include himself with the group that he's addressing. So for him to say, "will be with us," is very different because usually it's with you, right? So the church that he's addressing, so to the Ephesians, to the Philippians, grace and peace be to you. So he's actually including himself in with this body, which makes it much more of that kind of intimate feeling that we have throughout the letter because it is directed to a very specific group of people, not to be a circulated letter. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have the stuff that John is bringing up here towards the end, so 7 through 11. He's specifically referencing these people don't believe in the incarnation of Christ, and they're coming in and trying to confuse you or pull you apart. And also he gives instructions not to let them into the house. Don't bring them into your home. Don't bring them into your church. Keep them completely separated. And we have some historical documents as well from early church fathers about this sort of thing happening in those times. Yep, good question. Okay, so now we know that we're talking about this particular church. It's likely a home church. Most of our churches at this time are home churches. So there's a leader or a group of elders typically in those home churches, and you've got members that are meeting in a home or in a house. And so that's actually going to be really important next week when we talk about the section about the false teachers, because that's going to there's some fun language with that. But it's a small church, really, really small group of people that we're looking at. And so we see back to verse 3, the greeting is different, will be with us. He also uses Jesus Christ, the Father's Son. So that title, the Father's Son, is one of the only times that this is used in a greeting for a New Testament letter. It's John really reinforcing the fact that Jesus is the Son of God. He is holy. He is fully God and fully man. So he's working that in from every angle as he can to reinforce that message to the readers of the letter, who may be confused, who may be tricked by some of these new things that are coming through. All right, and so he concludes it by saying, in truth and love. Like, so grace, mercy, and peace will be with us in truth and love. And that's going to be the theme of the entire letter. So verse 4, we get into, so it says some of your children. So that was one of the questions we had. So we say some of the children. Does that indicate that some of the members of this local church have already gone astray? Not likely. The language here is more along the lines of John getting a report back and hearing about some of the members and some of the things that have been going on in their lives. I think it just, the context is showing us that it's more likely that he's just heard some really good things about a few members. It doesn't necessarily indicate that the others aren't walking in truth. So he's rejoicing greatly to hear this. And it's a mode of encouragement, right, for the church. So he's going from saying, grace will be with us. I'm so happy to see that you guys are walking in love. I'm hearing really great examples of how this church is thriving. You're following the commands of the Father. This is excellent. I'm super proud of you. So that recognition is a form of encouragement in verse 4. So we have the question here. So it's at the end of verse 4, just as we were commanded by the Father. So what is that command? So walking in truth, yes, is what we were commanded to do by the Father. But what is that command? Where do we see that command from the Father to walk in truth? Where's John getting this from? Any ideas? All right, so this is going to be 1 John 3:23. Zach, I think I've got that one pulled up for us. So this is where, just in the previous letter from John, he writes, "This is his commandment," speaking of Jesus, "that we believe in the name of the Father. Sorry, this is his commandment, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another just as he has commanded us." So the command is to love one another, right? So that is the command. That is what we are supposed to do, is to love one another. All right. And so in verse 4, we see walking in truth is what we were commanded to do by the Father. So John is equating walking in the truth with loving one another, right? He's tying love and truth together in these two passages, in these two different letters. So often we see a tension in life between truth and love, right? Have you guys ever seen that? Can you think of an example of when truth might be at odds with love? Yeah, that's right. Sometimes the truth can hurt, right? So if you have to be very honest with somebody, maybe you've sinned against them or something terrible has happened, that's going to hurt to tell them the truth, but you love them, and so you have to tell the truth. That's right. Yep, last forever. Truth and love do last forever. Yep. Yeah. Another really simple example is how does this shirt look on me? Right? Do you love me enough to tell me that it's a little tight, a little tighter than it was a couple months ago? Right. So that's not a great answer, right? But love and truth often get put at odds, especially in our society among non-believers. Can you guys think of an example where truth and love are fighting against each other, even today? Yeah, it's like social justice stuff. So if everybody has a different truth, everybody says, I have my truth. It's hard, and everybody has different definitions of what love is. How can we hold truth and love together when they have different meanings, they have different expressions? It's very hard. We even see this in how churches function. So you see, churches that are heavily oriented towards truth. So high doctrine, extensive Bible studies, really theologically deep, a lot of seminary stuff going on, apologetics ministries, heavy focus on truth. And then you see other churches that maybe are swinging the other way on heavily love-oriented, so a high focus on counseling or on community programs, soup kitchens, mission work in the communities, those kind of things. And this can often be at odds, right? So how often have we seen churches be criticized for being too theological or too open and welcoming, right? That's a tension that we have all the time. We have churches that are so loving and welcoming, air quotes, that they'll bring in anybody and make them clergy. They'll accept any lifestyle, even if it's not in line with the truth that they follow. And we also see churches that are so focused on truth and doctrine that they, can be called frozen chosen. We've heard that term before. That there's no love outside of that. It's all about knowledge, and there's no heart that goes along with that. And so that is some of the tension that we see even in evangelical circles. And John uses this letter to show us that truth and love actually don't have to be at odds at all. They should be in the Christian life in step with one another, and it actually requires both of these things to continue to walk as a Christian. So, verse 5. Now I ask you, dear lady, not as though I were writing you a new commandment, but the one that we've had from the beginning, that we love for one another. 4 kind of big things to jump in here. One we talked about earlier, so ask. So what is the question that's being asked here? So he's asking that we love one another. So we take out the hyphens in the middle of the sentence. It's a very ADD sentence. I love it. So it like starts one spot, goes here, comes back here, and then finishes up. All right, that's how my brain works. So it makes sense. So he asks you, dear lady, that we love one another. This ask language, we just finished up Philemon. So I want to see if anybody can connect those dots. Where have we seen this ask versus command language? In Philemon. And Philemon, right? So what was the setup there? What was Paul doing with Philemon with that ask versus command language? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Paul was asking Philemon to take Onesimus back in as a brother and is no longer a slave. But how did he couch that? He said, even though I have authority to tell you to do it, right? Like you would have to listen to me if I told you, because I'm an apostle. So I could command you, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to give you the opportunity to be obedient to what Christ has shown us, to be obedient to loving one another and restoring this brother. So that's having that in context where we have just been the last 2 or 3 weeks. Let's come in here. So we see John asking, dear lady, being the church, he is asking them to love one another, not commanding them. How does that change the tone of the letter? Ask versus command. Yep. Yeah, so in Philemon, he was leaving it up to him to do the right thing. Yep. And so here it could be similar. It could be, I'm not going to force you to do the right thing. Yep. Yes, miss? Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. So using the context later, we're going to be talking about the deceivers and how to handle those. So asking here for them to love one another, I think is an interesting point. Yep. So how do you feel when your husband or your wife comes to you and tells you to do something versus asks you to do something? Yeah, it's a place of love. Thank you, wife, for telling me that. Yeah. Somebody else's wife or husband. Tell me how that works. Yeah, so when do you feel more loved? When you're asked or when you're commanded? When I'm asked, right? If I'm asked to take out the garbage, I'll do it tomorrow and I'll feel super loved. If I'm commanded to take out the garbage, I'll do it now. I'm not going to feel super loved, right? I'm just kidding because she's right there. So that's the ask there is much more friendly. It's much more personal. It goes along with this us language and just the rest of the words that John is using here to really show this close relationship and this identification that he has with the recipients of this letter. What is the biggest key here that he is not commanding something? And I'll give you a hint, it's the middle of this verse. That's right. He said the command is coming from somebody else. He said, I'm not writing you a new commandment. This is one we've had from the beginning, right? So I think the ask there is because he's not asking really anything but for them to just be obedient and to remember what the command was from Jesus, not from himself. He's placing the authority on Jesus in that case because he doesn't have it himself to command them to do this. So this new commandment that he references, so he said, I'm not writing you a new commandment, but the one that we've had from the beginning. So we've got this new versus the beginning language here. And that's one of the questions we had was, what is from the beginning? If you had to guess based on what we see in the context, what we know about John as a disciple, as an author, what is from the beginning referencing here? Why?
Because Jesus is the one who makes the command like be the command.
Yep. Good job, wife. Thank you. So we could look at one of two ways. We could look at in the beginning being literally Genesis in the beginning, creation language. what's more likely here, because of the context that we have about it being love one another, what is the greatest command that Jesus gives? Love one another, right? And so knowing that John is the disciple that Jesus loved, that's what he calls himself, and this whole discourse that he gives us in John 13 and 15, the Last Supper, all about what it looks like to love in a way that Jesus commands us to, I think it's super clear for us that we're looking at from the beginning, meaning when the gospel came, like the beginning of the gospel, when Christ came to us, that flipped everything on its head and started something new. And so that is the beginning that he's referencing there. So it's not a new commandment, one from the beginning. We know it's the time that they first heard the gospel message from Christ. Also, we know because it's the last of 6 references to Jesus' command to love one another that John has made in his 2 letters here, 1 John and 2 John. So the first 5 are 1 John 3:11, verse 23, 4:7, 4:11, and 4:12. Which all are likely depending and coming out of the Last Supper discourses in John 13 and 15. So John is throughout his letter in 1 John and 2 John using this language of loving one another as the command of Christ. That is what we are to do. First and foremost, is to love one another. Very cool. And so he says, ask you, dear lady, and then he goes along, he says, I ask that you love one another. And then in verse 6, we see his definition of what is love. So how does he define love? He said, this is love, that we walk according to his commandments, right? So love is walking according to his commandments. Does anybody have a different translation there? I really like the NIV's translation, that we walk in obedience, right, to his commands. So what is love? It is obedience to Christ's commands. What is Christ's command? That we love one another, right? So it's a circle, right? It kind of goes around. So if we are to show love, then we should be obedient to Christ and follow what he has told us to do, which is to love one another, right? And so to love is to love one another. That's where it comes back and forth. And so this is the agape love. Yeah, this is the like friendship, brotherly love that we have. Yep, among the church. Yep. Yeah, and that's why in some cases the lady, where's she at? The elect lady, sometimes can be confusing because we see all of this stuff about love and this elect lady. Like, is this a first century love letter that we've stumbled across that made its way in? It's not. It's a different kind of love that we're talking about. And it's that brotherly love that we see among a church body, not among husband and wife or like coworkers or that kind of thing. Yeah, very good. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That dude loves love. Yeah, John is a big fan. Yeah. And it's another big key for how we know that John is the elder, right, in this, because he uses the such same language throughout all of his letters, right? And so we see this is love, that we walk according to his commandments, all right? So since we should persist in love, that's our command, is to walk in love and to continue to love. Well, what that looks like is that we have to walk in obedience to Christ's commands. Where have we heard this before? What's John referencing when he's saying that we walk according to his commandments? It's another John book. I'll give you a hint. 1 John 4, 7, 8. Yeah. What are those? You have it memorized? Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. Very good. Also, what I want to point us to, and Zach, I think this is the other one that I put on there, John 15, 10 through 14. Yep. Where Jesus says, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and will abide in his love, and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than someone lay down his life for his friends, right? So you are my friends if you do what I command you. So we have this closeness and this joy and this just intimate relationship with Christ if we do what he commands, which is to love one another. And so coming back here to verse 6, we see that that's clearly what's in picture here, is that we are walking in obedience to Christ, and that means that we love one another. Then we come back to walking in it. So just as you've heard from the beginning, he uses that beginning language again, back to just as we heard from Christ at the beginning, so that you should walk in it. Some of you have your translations, the it is love, so you should walk in love. The Greek here kind of bounces around. There's lots of different directions that we could point to. Some of them reference the truth, some of them reference love, some of them reference both. Which answer is it? Yes, right? It's both. That's why it's kind of tricky in that sense. The idea is that we should walk in both. We should walk in truth and we should walk in love because you can't do them independently. As followers of Christ, if we're walking in obedience, we're walking in the truth that he has given us. We're also walking in love to one another because we know that truth and we're following that truth in obedience, right? So, so the tension goes away in that sense because you're not having to say, okay, I love you. Can I tell you the truth because I love you? Like, is it going to hurt you? No, the truth and the love are together because you're sharing that truth together as Christians, and you're sharing that love together because you have that shared truth. Essentially, we can break it into kind of three themes for this. Love is three things. One, it's commanded by God. That's the theme that John's giving to us here, is that love is not something that we've come from man. It's not guidance that we've gotten from man, but it's something that is commanded by God, and so we should be obedient to it. Love is personified by the elder, by John. John is showing in his letter that he is 100% committed to loving this church. We see in verse 1, I love this church in truth. We love all who know the truth. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with us. I rejoiced greatly to see your people walking in truth. All of these things, Paul is showing you, this is, I'm living this. I'm not just telling you to do it, but this is part of my life, and I want this to continue to be part of your life because that's what Christ has called us to. And then the third theme is that ultimately love is characterized by obedience. Love without obedience is not love, is what is what John is getting to it here. So what does it look like to love the truth? Any ideas? Yeah, so if we love the truth, then we pursue the truth, right? We defend the truth. We spend time with the truth, in the truth, being the scriptures, being Christ who says, I am the truth. John calls him the truth, right? So loving the truth means that we spend time with it, we defend it, we cherish it. What does, on the other side of that, what does love that stems from truth look like? Sacrificial, right? Why so?
Well, that's the illustrations he gives in Scripture of what true love is.
Yeah, from what we just read, right? It said, love is that we lay down our lives for our friends, right? It's sacrificial. So if you are committed to a truth and you have that point right there that is absolutely correct and is absolutely the truth, are you going to have any trouble working towards that? Are you going to have any doubt when you love somebody that what you're doing and that obedience that you have is pointed in the right direction? No, you have a clear direction of where you're going, and so it makes loving easier. It makes love flow from us without doubt, without uncertainty, because we know that it's pointed in the right direction. What isn't love? So love and truth, how do those things not go together? Love isn't approval, right? That's what the world wants to tell us, is that to love someone is to approve of everything that they do, to approve of their choices, to approve of their truth, right? What's true to them or what they believe. It denies truth in favor of preference or their personal, truth. This is my truth, and this is your truth. It's different. They want love to be approval. They want us to, and we see this in attacks against the church often, is that because you are condemning me, you must hate me, you must not love me. When often should be, at least in the Christian life, a love for that person is a love pointing them towards the truth. And without the truth, that love can't reach its fulfillment, and it can't be full without that truth. What isn't truth? Truth isn't facts, right? Something can be factual and not truthful. Any thoughts on that? You guys ever heard that? You guys seen that? Yeah. So the idea, you can know the facts about Jesus and the gospel without considering them to be truth. You can know facts about something and it not be the truth. If let's say, I look at an elephant and I describe it to you as something that is large, gray, has 4 legs, and makes weird noises, that could be a donkey to you, right? That could be an elephant to me, and that could be a donkey to you. Facts do not make truth. And when we put it this way, Mark Dever actually put it this way, and I really like it, where he compares, he says, truth and love are like going on a road trip, right? I want to go to North Carolina on a trip up to the mountains. So truth is the map to get to your destination. Let's say you're not looking at street signs, anything else. You have to have that map because you've never been there. I have to figure out how to get there. This is how I'm getting there. Love is the fuel that goes in the car, that gas it up and get it going. Without directions, I can drive and drive and drive on a full tank and never get where I'm going. And I can have a great time. I can drive as long as I want to. I can love as much as I want to. But if I don't have that destination and that truth to point it at, I'm never going to arrive where I need to arrive. Also, without fuel in the car, you're just going to have a nice time sitting in the car looking at a map, right? You're not going anywhere. You'll know everything you need to know about getting to where you're going, but you can't get there because you don't have the fuel to get you going. So in that sense, truth is our destination. It's where we're pointing ourselves to. It's where we're going. Fuel is the motivation. Love is the fuel and the motivation to get us going to that spot. That is where we are actively acting in love towards other people. We're walking in love, in obedience to Christ, loving one another to get to our destination, which is ultimately the truth of the gospel. All right, truth is what guides our love. Love is what fuels our walk, and we need both. That's what John is pointing out to us in this letter. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Did we cover everything? Mm-hmm.
You mentioned John 15, 10 through 14, but 34 and 35 also goes on.
Yep.
Where it tells you that's if you're my disciples, that you give love one to another, then people know you're my disciples.
Absolutely. Yeah. Big verse there. So John 15, 34 and 35, by this all men will know that you're my disciples if you love one another, right? Absolutely. That's one of the songs that the kids sing all the time in the car, and I love it. It's a little earworm. It sticks it there, and it's a good reminder. Yeah. Other questions that we had. So the timing with 1 John, I think maybe that was your question, or maybe Karen's question. So the timing with 1 John, we don't know for sure. We know they're written about the same time. We know that 1 John was circulated. We don't have any sort of guarantee or evidence that this group would have seen 1 John. John repeats a lot of the same themes and a lot of the same language from 1 John in this letter. That could either be a way of reiterating that language and reinforcing that message, or it could be that this group hasn't received that letter yet, or they haven't seen it. But it is showing that he's saying the same thing. He's being consistent in his language as it goes across. But it may not be that they have read 1 John or that they know 1 John. They didn't have New Testaments to look and say, oh yeah, go to 1 John. That's that part of it. Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. Because again, 1 John was a circular, so it was meant to be sent around to all of the churches, whereas this one was to a specific house church. And we'll see in the next letter, and I wish we could do 3 John as well, because it's just as short, and it's kind of the opposite of 2 John. So whereas 2 John, it's a warning against false teachers and how to disconnect them from hospitality, which is what we're going to talk about next week as we wrap up the letter. 3 John is the opposite. It's about identifying missionaries and bringing missionaries into the home church and supporting them and how to really advance the gospel in that way with hospitality. So we see these 2 pictures of hospitality, one of rejecting it completely with false teachers and one for encouraging it with our missionaries and workers of the gospel. Yeah, so in terms of it being, I don't know that there's any evidence for 2 John being a response to 1 John or a way of saying, hey, you got what I was talking about correctly, or you're struggling with this, so I'm going to reinforce it. I think it's a specific letter to address what's happening in this home church. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we have about 5 minutes. Next week, we're going to talk about the 7 through 13 to get to the end of it, specifically 7 through 11. There's not much going on in 12 and 13 theologically, but we do see some really, really serious language about how to handle false teachers, especially in this church setting. So we're going to dig into that, and that'll be a lot of fun. But let's close this out, and thank you guys for your participation. Father, we thank you for your letter from John that you have preserved, that you have given to the church, and that you have given to us for our encouragement. Father, it may not be a 14, 15 chapter magnum opus like Romans or some of these others, but Father, it is rich. It helps us to see what it means to walk in love and in truth, and how that should just completely characterize what we do as a church body, that what connects us is not similarities in interests or family or preferences, Father. What connects us is Christ and obedience to him. Help us to see that, help us to walk in that in truth and in love, and help us to just personify that, just as John did in his letter here as we move into this next week. Thank you, Lord, for all that you do for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Cool. Thank you all.